Workers' compensation. When someone does ask us about due diligence, all they really ask for is, does succession or predecessor arrangements impact on us? Does anyone have any idea what that is besides you? No. So let's get technical for like 2 seconds. So if you want to go read up, that's where it all is. It's really, really riveting. In all the funded states, it's scripted. This is what you must do. There is no way around it. In the underwritten states where I love working, it's dealer's choice. So if you can convince an underwriter to do it a different way, they will do it a different way. But they have the rights to basically use all the history of the business. 3 main approaches. As Andrew said, you buy the business, you've bought everything. So you buy the business, you buy the history. So if you've bought the history and it's performing badly, that's going to come across onto you. In some states, if you continue the operations, even if it's under a separate business entity, you continue the history. In some states, just to make it complicated, if you buy the entity, buy the operations but not the business, but there are common directors in place, then you inherit the history. If there are no common directors in place, you don't inherit the history, because we like to make things simple in workers' compensation. But the other thing that people often forget is succession isn't always bad. If you are buying a good performing business, then you might want to buy that business and not the operations, because they might be sitting there 25, 30% better than industry. So if you buy the operation and not the business, and you are not a common director in Victoria, then that means you're going to start at the industry rate. Right? So in those states where you don't automatically inherit history, you might want to look at whether or not that's a good thing to do. All right? What about the hidden or undisclosed liabilities? We often don't think about going and looking at, are there claims that are coming? Right? Has the business structure changed? Right? So when we look at proper underwriting, which is what I call it, what we do in the risk states, we have a factor called IBNR, incurred but not yet reported. So what are the claims that may have taken place that have not actually been lodged? So true underwriting actually has a figure that goes into the calculation to allow for those things. So what claims, and we see the on hearing loss claims, are sitting there that will be lodged on you as the new owner that you're unaware of? What about contractors and labour hire? So we often, people have their idea of what a contractor is. The law says a number of different things. There's an interesting court case recently that's flipped things around a little bit. But the people that you think are contractors in the business you're buying may actually be workers. And if their wages have not been declared, again, if you're inheriting their history, if you're buying the business, the regulators in most states have the right to come in and look at 4 years prior in the current year and say, those people were workers, you haven't declared the wages, here's the additional premium and the penalty. Well, alternatively, if we're looking at labour hire, how much of the business is labour hire? Are you aware that there's a significant component of labour hire in there? And if you decide to change that up and employ people, what's that going to do to increase the liability of your workers' compensation? The other side there, when you're using labour hire, what's going to happen for recoveries? So yes, it's a great way to avoid our responsibilities on workers' comp, supposedly, but if a labour hire person is injured on your site, the regulators and the insurers have the right to look for recovery if they can prove that you're responsible. So do we go and look at that? The other side is contractors, labour hire. What about common law? So if they're injured on your site, have you looked at the fact that yes, they weren't a worker, but that doesn't mean that they can't make a common law claim against you as part of their workers' comp claim with their own employer? I broke it. It's a good trick. What about changes to company structure? What's actually occurred in that business prior to you buying it that actually may have changed the liability and exposure that you're going to have? Right? Simple things such as, has something happened that's changed industry classification and you haven't looked at that? No one's looked at that. They made a structural change, they changed the business operation, but no one actually thought to correct the industry classification. Again, the insurers, the agents have the right to go back 4 years in the current year, correct that, and if that was an error that wasn't in your favour, you need to pay the additional premium and a penalty. What about errors due to declared remuneration? If we step outside of workers' comp and think about all the underpayments that we've seen across for wages over the last couple of years, Workers' compensation, there are a multitude of factors that change across the states. We see it all the time where people are declaring wages in one state because that's how they've always done it in another state. Yet what that means is they're either under-declaring or over-declaring. Once again, the regulators have the right to come back in and look at the 4 years prior and the current year and say you've been under-declaring. Right? They can make you pay that back, pay the additional premium plus a penalty. But if we look at those two things in reverse, remuneration and industry classification, there may be an opportunity for a very quick windfall for the business once you take it over, if you identify that during due diligence and change it once you start. So if the industry classification is wrong, but changing it actually lowers the rate, we can go back that 4 years in the current year and actually get a refund. If you've been over-declaring your remuneration, we can go back that 4 years in the current year and achieve a refund. So when you're looking at this, yes, it can be horrific, but there are also some opportunities for financial gain or for benefit that that the seller hasn't identified, that can get you some instant cash flow once you take over the business. So here's two examples that I've dealt with over this one's going back a fair way. One company looked at the implication of succession. Unfortunately, it went like this. I'm sitting at my desk, I'm hearing a couple of brokers mumbling behind me at another company I used to work at. And I finally turn around and they go, you kind of know workers' comp. You kind of know workers' compensation, you guys. Can you look at this contract for us? Tell us what you think. Had a look at it, went through the paperwork, and said, right, okay, guys, when are they signing this contract? They signed it this morning. Hadn't looked at it. I said, right. So they've bought the entity, they bought the entire business. Succession will apply. Had they bought the operations and not the entity, they would have halved their premium because they were a very poor performing employer. Right? The other thing is this same company identified extensive use of labour hire after they'd taken over the business. And what they started to get within 3 to 6 months was all these recoveries coming through from work cover for labour hire individuals who'd been injured. And these were significant recoveries. We're talking millions of dollars. Right? So failing to look at those things actually hit the balance sheet of this business straight off the bat. This one's a bit more complicated. This is actually a client who did some good due diligence, tried to do all the right things. But when they called us in, here's what had happened. The business they bought was part of another business. That business, quite large, said, you know what, this is what we really do. You know, this trading entity under this company, this is what we truly do. We don't do that. Why have we even got that? So then what they did in 2007, they said, let's put this business into the parent company. Let's separate out this business. And then in 2018, they sold that business to our client. A couple of things happened here. There was a claim from the other trading entity that occurred, the injury occurred in 2017 when it was prior to the change in structure, which meant it was still part of the company my client had bought. So when that claim was lodged after my client had bought the business, for an entity he didn't know and had no control over, it landed on him. In 2020, we actually changed the way we calculate premium in Victoria. So the final year, so the year prior claims only used the weekly benefits. But back when he bought it, they used the benefits and an estimate. That claim was lodged because the person needs surgery. So as soon as we know that surgery, that estimate increases, his premium went out of control. It was going to cap. To make it worse, what we identified is your business activity has changed. When they pulled this component out of the business, you were no longer doing A, you were doing B. Now, the rate of that wasn't that significantly different. But in Victoria, New South Wales, states where there's capping, when you make a fundamental or a major change to the business operation, capping goes away. So now not only was it going up, it wasn't going to cap, it was going to keep going up. This cost them an additional $200,000 on their premium, right? So what it would have been if the capping had been there, would have been maybe 80. Capping gone away, it's doubled, almost tripled what their overall premium was going to be, right? So you can see how simple things, if you don't look at them, if you don't understand, can have a dramatic impact on your overall workers' compensation bill that comes through to you. So quick takeaways, things to look at. Obviously premium simulation, see what's going to happen going forward. Grab claims reports, see where the nasty claims are. Look at incident reports and compare them against the claims reports. Am I seeing an incident that was quite significant? Am I seeing a corresponding claim? If not, you want to find out about that. Look at the organisational charts. What's changed? What has happened to the business operations? Has it remained consistent? Have a look at their declared RAM. Make sure that they've been declaring correctly. All right? And on that note, I'll get everyone up. We'll start the panel and get Simon to come and facilitate for us.